Hello there. Welcome to Unwrapping Wine. I'm one of your hosts, Randall Voss.
And I'm Ann Zwink.
So today we have Ellen Landis. She is a friend of the hosts here, and her background is she's a wine journalist. She's a certified sommelier, and she's also a wine educator. So we very much appreciate her time to chat with us today.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, Ellen, if you want to talk a little bit about yourself for starters, so the people can get to know you, then we can maybe get into some questions.
Sure. I am a journalist and a certified somm and wine educator, and I judge about 18 wine competitions a year, ranging from regional competitions to national competitions to international competitions, which is quite fascinating and keeps me flying around the world.
18 competitions a year?
Yes. And I love every one of them. There's always, no matter how much any of us know about wine, there's more to learn.
So how'd you get into wine, Ellen, just out of curiosity?
Well, let me give you the brief edition of that story, as I understand that my great-grandfather made wine in Croatia, and that's where my parents' roots are from. She's 100% Croatian. And my maternal grandmother always had wine on the table, a jug of red wine. And I was curious from probably age 5, because my parents would say, I'd say, I want the red one. And Mom said, no, honey, you have to be a little older to have, this is wine, and you can't have wine right now. You have to be a little older. Why not? It was very questioning. And so the children had milk and water, and the adults had wine and water. And I was really persistent. And my mother put 1 drop of red wine in my glass of milk, and it turned pink. And I thought I was special. I have wine in my glass. And that was a very, very young age. So as I grew into teenage years, I asked, gee, when can I taste wine? I know I'm not 21 yet, but when can I taste wine at home? So my mother said one night, okay, now I'm like 16. If you want to taste a taste or 2 tastes of wine, you must stay home for the rest of the night. No leaving, going to your friend's house, no going anywhere. And my sisters are saying, oh, wait, we're going to the movies. And, nope, I want to taste it. So that went on. And then fast forward to 21, and I really jumped in and got involved learning more about grapes and viticulture, and studied just on my own everything I could learn about wine. And then when I turned 21, I went to a winery with some girlfriends, and I started talking about one of the wines. And this gentleman appeared from behind the house and said, who was just speaking about my wine? I timidly raised my hand like, oh, am I in trouble? He said, could you write that down for me? What you just said is exactly what I want to put on my label. I want that to be my back label, and I will be happy to pay you for it. And I said, well, you can pay me in wine. So there you go.
Do you remember what your first glass of wine was?
I don't remember the very first wine, but I remember some memorable ones. One of them was a Joseph Phelps Insignia Bordeaux blend from Napa Valley, which was beautiful. And a Pinot Noir from the Willamette Valley in Oregon was very memorable because it tasted so different to me compared to the bolder Pinot Noirs of California. So I was very interested in learning more about, these regions definitely show a different profile, yet they have some basic characteristics that are common. And then other memorable, my first taste of Catawba was very memorable. It's quite distinctive. And I have since learned to appreciate it. And I love to help people understand about that particular grape because it's made sweet, it's made still and sparkling, it's made, on the maybe semi-dry side too. And it's, once you taste it, how can you forget it? It's so unique. But, and then my first Marquette, that was at the Mid-American competition. It took a gold at the competition, and many of us had never had it. It was in its early years. I'm not quite sure, Randall, if you remember what year it was that we were exposed to that as an entry, but we all thought it was beautiful on my panel. And then I learned more about, it was developed at the University of Minnesota, and obviously a beautiful, cold, hardy grape that is tasty and I think holds up. That and Chambourcin, I think, hold up to some of the major grape cultivars, Cabernet and Merlot and Syrah. These two grapes show beautifully, and they're not nearly quite as expensive as some of the more known cultivars.
You mean a bottle of wine of Chambourcin or Marquette or Catawba is not as expensive?
Absolutely, that's right.
Okay.
It's quite reasonable. In fact, that's one of the really exciting reasons to go visit different AVAs across America, because you'll find a vast difference. If you make appointments to taste at Napa Valley, you want to plan on spending minimum $75 for a tasting fee.
Right.
And, it's quite costly. And there are still wineries in other parts of the country that offer a complimentary, perhaps 2 or 3 tastes of wine. And if not complimentary, it's a very reasonable tasting fee. And I'm going to say you're 90% guaranteed to find something you like at every winery, because there's so many unique wines. And every palate is its own palate, doesn't compare with anyone else's. So you want to find what pleases your palate, not what pleases my palate, because you're going to be enjoying it. And there's just so many unique wines to try and find what you like.
Absolutely. So if we wanted to find a Marquette, what region of the country would we go to find a Marquette?
The Marquette is grown in Illinois, in Minnesota, and I believe in Kansas, in Michigan. These are just 4 different states that I've tasted Marquettes from.
Right.
And I'm sure the list is far beyond that I just haven't tasted yet, but I'm really quite impressed. I tasted a new one from Detroit, the Detroit metro, Detroit area of Michigan. It was beautiful.
Awesome.
It was spicy and expressive and beautifully balanced and great structure. Just delightful.
Awesome. So if any of you out there who are listening are in any of those regions, we can go out and maybe find a Marquette bottle and taste some spice, taste some fruit, and taste a little bit of the local agriculture.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
It's a beautiful wine. Blackberry and spice and really beautifully crafted.
So you kind of talked a little bit about wine competitions and different cultivars, Ellen. So when you go to all these 18 competitions, spread throughout the country, international competitions, how do you judge wines made from different cultivars? I mean, to some degree, I think it's tough to compare apples to oranges, is the cliche, right? Is how do you compare a Cabernet to a Marquette or what have you? So when you judge at such a wide range of competitions and are exposed to a lot of different wines, how do you go about comparing different cultivars at these competitions?
Yes. So sometimes you will have, say, a flight of 7 wines, and it could be called other red varieties, is the term they use. And you could have a different cultivar in each glass. You could have a Cab, a Marquette. Some of the other lesser known wines, maybe Grenache is pretty well known, but depending on the size of the competition, there's not always a lot of every variety. You're always going to have a lot of Cab and a lot of Merlot and a lot of Riesling and a lot of Chardonnay and a lot of Sauvignon Blanc. But the wines in any particular competition for which the entry is low, maybe 3 different ones are entered, they'll either show in another red or another white category. So with that, you particularly have to keep an open mind every time you pick up a glass. So you keep an open mind, you do the best to clear your palate between each different cultivar that you're tasting. And if you've never tasted a particular wine, then listen to your panel mates. Certainly ask the question, has anyone tasted a Marquette, for example? And a few weeks ago, I had one on my panel, and the other 2 judges had never had it. Okay, so I got to give them a little education on Marquette and help them understand maybe some of the typical markers that we 3 have talked about here today. And that just helps to give their minds something to base it on. But then when you're assessing any wine, you want to assess the aroma, the entry, the palate from front to mid to back palate, and the finish. And even if you've never had that cultivar before, you look for structure, balance, and texture. And, these are really important components to a solid made wine.
Absolutely. I think it's important it's more than just the taste, right?
That's right.
There's so many aspects to the wine that as a judge, you have to consider every little bit. So do each of those aspects, do certain aspects hold different importance in judging, or what are the things that are the most important while you're judging?
Yes, I think balance in a wine is really critical. The complexity can vary from one particular type of wine to another, but whether it's a light and bright and fun white wine or a very deep, complex red wine, you still need to find balance in a good wine. So I think if the balance is there and there's no flaw, which could be a whole seminar about flaws, which would get pretty technical though. But, if you don't feel there's a flaw in the wine as a professional judge, and you haven't had that particular cultivar, then you look for balance. That's really key. Important to me is aromatic. If a wine doesn't have an aromatic, that can be a marker to there being something wrong with the wine, first of all. And other times, some wines certainly are more aromatic than others. For example, Gewürztraminer is quite aromatic, lychee, and very, occasionally spicy, but not always. And, other cultivars aren't quite as aromatic, and some are more aromatic. But I think it tells you a lot about the wine and what you are smelling in the glass. So you want to give due time to evaluating the aroma. And then how does it feel on the palate? Are the tannins overpowering the fruit? Or is there not enough acid? If there's not enough acidity in the wine, then it's also called a flabby wine. It just doesn't have any lift to it. And, acid is an important aspect of the wine. So the tannins, the fruit, you want to find fruit at the core. So you should have, if the fruit, the tannins, and the acids are in balance, you've got a pretty good wine. And again, whether you have a preference for that variety isn't as important when you're judging. And you do have to say your preferences aside, because if the wine was a beautifully made Chamberson, but you don't really favor that particular cultivar, then you can still give it a gold if it's well made. You're looking for how well was this wine crafted for what it is.
Right. Okay, so so you're talking about giving wines golds, and can you give us a little background on how a competition is even run? I mean, wine competitions aren't like wine Olympics, are they? How does this work?
Yes, that's a really good question, because some feel that how can you possibly find one wine out of hundreds to give the gold to? And actually, in any given flight of wines, and it varies anywhere from maybe 4 wines up to 10 or 12, depending on the competition. But you can have more than one gold wine just in one flight. And, it's you want to evaluate fairly every single wine as its own product. It's not, gee, well, it's not as good as wine number 1, but it's better than wine number 10. You just analyze each individual wine for their aspects and their beauty, or not, as you taste it. But you do want to give fair chance, and they're not graded on a curve. Nowadays, there usually are more 3 judge panels than there used to be. 4 used to be kind of a common number. And with 4, of course, you're going to have a tie. But how it runs, let me back up a little bit. So flights are brought to the table, typically with just a number on the stem of or the base of the glass. So you've got, say, 10 wines with different numbers on them, and you know only the variety. You don't know where it's from or what the cultivar is or who made it. You just know the variety. So again, it's back to how well was that made for that particular type of wine. Each of the judges, whether it be 3 or 4 or 5, rates on a rating sheet. They write notes about what they think of the wine, and they score it based on their palate. So let's say I give a wine a silver. Judge 2 gives it a gold.
Okay.
Judge 3 gives it a silver. So at the moment, that wine will be a silver. But if one person has said gold, I always like to ask the panel to retaste and think about it, and ask the gold medal judge to tell us why he or she thought it deserved gold. Because we can all miss something once in a while. Nobody, even I think of Doug Frost, who is one of the 4 master of wine and master sommeliers in the world. And he said, no one can get it right every single time. There's, everyone can miss it, no matter how much you know. So it's good to listen if someone really felt it was gold, and then the 2 silver judges can decide whether they, after tasting again, do they want to elevate it to gold, and then 2 golds and 1 silver, it would become a gold medal. If all 3 judges awarded gold, then it's a double gold, regardless of how many judges there are. So the scoring goes like this. The ratings start at no medal, which typically is either a flawed wine or almost impossible to appreciate on the palate.
Oh, no.
Like unripe or something like that.
Yeah. And that doesn't happen tremendously often, but flaws happen. TCA is really not the fault of the winemaker, but it happens. And so no medal would be typically for flawed wines, or something you feel is really not quite right about that wine that a typical wine drinker wouldn't appreciate drinking it. A bronze medal is a quaffable wine that yes, I would drink a glass of this wine. It's not extraordinary. It doesn't have really as strong a marker of that cultivar as you might think it should. A silver medal is an excellent wine. You would recommend it to your family. And a gold medal is an extraordinary example of that wine type. So that's pretty common across the many competitions I have judged. And I think it's a fair way to judge.
What I've always found interesting is how people pick out the best in the show. You got, say, 10 or so reds that are all gold medals that people think are awesome. How do you say which one is the most awesome of them all? Is that just a judgment call, or how do you approach that?
Yes, that's the toughest part, because these wines that have all received gold medals to be in the sweepstakes or the final round. So then that's where your personal preference could have some sway, because they've all been judged to be either gold or double gold already. So you should have some very beautiful wines.
So, Ellen, you mentioned a couple cultivars that maybe the bulk of the wine world might not be as familiar with. I think you mentioned Catawba, Marquette, Chambourcin. Any other kind of non-traditional cultivars that you have experienced, appreciate, or you would encourage other people to seek out and try?
Yes, absolutely. Traminette is one that I always hoped to get when I was at Mid-American competition. It's like, and I say, whoever judges Traminette, can you save me a taste? Because it's such an expressive grape. It does have some Gewürztraminer parentage in it, and it's really floral and beautifully elegant, with good fruit, sometimes tropical fruit. You get different hints of spice in Traminette, and it's lively and just sails across the palate with ease. It's really a beautiful wine. Another one I like very much, and that's made in different styles, is Vignol. And Vignol, I have tasted excellent dry Vignols, semi-sweet Vignols, and then late harvest dessert wine style Vignol that is extraordinary. And they're made all across America, not so much on the West, I'd say the 10 Western states, but Mid-America to East, Vignols does a beautiful job, along with Concord and Norton and Marquette and Chambourcin. I mean, there are just so many really pretty wines. Frontignac is another, it's a French-American hybrid, a really nice black fruits, black currant, black cherry, black plum, really pretty, can have as much complexity as some of the Cabernets and Merlots and Syrahs you've tasted. It really has a lot going on, and usually has a hint of spice. And let's see, the other white, Brianna, is another wine that I think is really pretty, floral, very juicy. Tropical fruit is typical. And even though it's maybe made on the semi-dry side and not extraordinarily sweet from a residual sugar standpoint, wines can still taste sweet because of the fruit content of the wine. You have some sweet guava or sweet pineapple. So that's another interesting point about wine and how you rate the dryness levels, because fruit, remember that fruit. I mean, you want ripe cherries in some of your Pinots, and you want ripe blackberries in your Cabs and Petit Syrahs. And so you do taste sweet fruit, but it could be vinified dry.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that is so interesting to me. Maybe it's everywhere, but I definitely notice it around us that there's many more ways than just one to make a certain grape variety into wine. So our grape varieties are so versatile that you might see it in many different styles of wine.
That's right. And some of the wines that I spoke of, these just really light, bright, pretty, well balanced. Again, it comes down to balance. And if you like refreshing white wines, there are many to choose from in cold, hardy regions. And people will say to me, I'll ask them, well, have you had a wine from Iowa? Have you had a wine from Michigan? Have you had a wine from Kansas? One of them said, well, no, I'm from Kansas. And what? Wine from Kansas? Yes, absolutely. So I give them a few recommendations and say, you better go back to your hometown, check it out.
I think it's interesting too, something like Vigneault, there may be some years that we can get it to the acidity low enough to do dry, but it's interesting because some years it's going to be tough to make some of those products too, to get the acidity down on something like Vigneault. So sometimes it might be one of those things where it's every other year they can produce a really good dry Vigneault to get the acidity down to make that work. So it's not always every year kind of thing for some of those unique things.
Very true, because the cold hardy regions really have to work hard because you do have the elements to deal with, and we can never predict the weather. When's the rain going to start? When's the snow going to be here? And, I remember a few years back, the polar vortex happened throughout the mid-America section. Oh, that was it devastated some vineyards. And yeah, wineries have replanted since then. So I think those grapes might be now starting to come into their time for making wine. But, if you lose a vineyard, you've got minimum 3 years to wait for your next round of that particular cultivar to be made into wine.
That's a tough setback. That's a lot of years that they're dealing with loss of income and extra work with limited reward with no yield. So that's a huge setback.
Yes, exactly. So give them a chance. That's what I would say to anyone is don't just think about the most popular known varieties. Go out there and experiment with new wines that you've never tried. And you're going to find some wines that are going to surprise you at how beautiful they are. And they exist. And I love sharing that word because the winemakers work every bit as hard, if not harder, in
absolutely
regions that are exposed to harsher climates. And when you just will learn so much about what can be made across America.
I love that. So that's your one word of advice to our listeners is give it a chance. Go try it out. There's so many yummy things to taste.
Absolutely. And they're reasonably priced in many cases. And they just open the door and can't wait for your visit. It's, you really feel the warm welcome when you walk into these smaller wineries and regions that are in, anywhere near mid-America. And that's a big band of states that makes wine, and every single state in our union has a wine that they have made. There's at least one winery in every state of ours. So make it your goal to go out and try something new because you're going to find something you like.
Absolutely.
Ellen, you judge quite a few competitions. Just curious, would you be willing to share, any of those that to our listeners that maybe they've tasted your handiwork in some wines that you've judged at these wine competitions?
Yes, definitely. And there are so many that I judge from year to year, but I do have a good list of them. So the national and international competitions. One is the American Fine Wine Competition in Florida every January. It is wines from all across America. And I am on their board, and I am one of their acquisition specialists. So I reach out to wineries and ask them to submit. And last year, there were many hybrid wines entered because I pulled in wines from Kansas and Michigan and let's see, Iowa and Illinois and Colorado. But people said, wow, who has discovered these unknown varieties? And our CEO said, well, talk to Ellen because she invited them and they've gotten a lot of golds today. So, and I was really excited because the judges there, it's across the US judges there's a mix of sommeliers, writers, retailers, educators, and chefs with a wine background. So, and many of these somms are choosing wines in restaurants across America, and they're thinking, oh, this might be something unique to put on our wine list. So it's nice. It's nice to get that kind of exposure for them. And I always encourage wineries, if you have a program for media samples, send me some of your wines that you would like my input on. And my style of writing is that I don't write negative reviews. I will call and talk to someone if I feel the wine was flawed or, started with good fruit and maybe something happened along the way. But I strictly write positive reviews, and I have plenty of wines to write about because there are so many wines of all cultivars that are made across America. Okay, so there's the East-West International Competition. Again, a lot of unique wines there, and it's pitting East against West is a little bit too strong of a word to say. But in the finals, in the sweepstakes, we will have a sparkling winner from the East and a sparkling winner from the West. And then we have to pick best sparkling of the competition. And there's a best Riesling of the East and Riesling of the West. So it goes like that. And so the final round, and this means these are all gold medals, we decide which the East or the West has the favorite wine of this particular year. And it goes back and forth. And every year there are some East and some West Coast winners. So wow. It's good. It's very fun. And, again, you get a broad spectrum of wines at that competition. The California State Fair is an all California competition. And the Great American International Competition in the Finger Lakes is one that has 23 judges, and half of them are from outside the US. So it's, a lot of international wines are entered, and there are judges from the Czech Republic and France and Spain and all across the globe, which is really interesting too, because there's where I see the most new cultivars, because these indigenous grapes in Czech Republic are far different than the grapes that we see in America. But it's fun. It's it's just learning. You're always learning. It's just great. And the Finger Lakes International is similarly international judges as well. The San Francisco Chronicle Competition, I'm sorry, I mentioned that already. The San Francisco International Competition is wines and spirits from all across the globe. So that's another big one. And then the the regional competitions, which one time included Mid-American, wonderful. And then in Washington, Oregon, I judge the Cascadia competition, which all of these competitions can, in the Northwest, focus on wines from Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and British Columbia.
Okay.
So that's kind of considered the Northwest region. And Montana, although there aren't too many wines from Montana, but occasionally we get a couple. And then there's the Oregon Wine Experience competition, which is all about just wines from Oregon. And the Northwest Invitational competition, where judges nominate to the CEO and chief judge 100 wines that they would like to recommend in the competition. And then the director and their co-owners of the business, Tracy and Eric, they reach out to all these wineries and say, you have been invited by one of our judges to enter this particular wine. And so that's kind of fun because all these wine professionals are inviting, their list of what they would deem gold worthy. So that's fun. And many small competitions in California by county. There's the Amador competition, El Dorado competition, Alameda, there's Calaveras. There are so many unique, smaller competitions where maybe 200 to 350 wines are judged. And, most of those keep to their county, but one of them says, oh, well, we're international. It can come from anywhere. It's like, wow, hey, that's good to know.
So, Ellen, what will you be opening tonight?
Tonight, I will be opening a Cabernet Sauvignon from Mendocino County, as they had sent some wines forward to me asking for my review.
Wonderful.
So that's on the table tonight.
I hope it's delicious. I'm sure it will be. And is there a way that we can share your contact information? Will you share your contact information with us? We'll make sure that we get it to our listeners.
Yes, definitely. I can share, which, my site is Ellen on Wine, and that's easily accessible. And there are hundreds of articles there and really lots of wine reviews from all around everywhere. There's a couple about them. I think there are 2 or 3 about the Mid-American competition. So that would include many wines from your area.
Right.
And so ellenonwine.com, and then I'll share my email address also. And so the magazines I write regular columns for are Great Northwest Wines. So that's all about the Northwest states. Okay. Michigan Uncorked magazine, which is all about Michigan. And my site, of course. And then I am a regular writer for the Slow Wine Guide, which is all about organic and biodynamic farming and wineries. And we've just submitted all our work for that a week or 2 ago. And the book is published every single year. So there's a new issue every year. And that's a really interesting book because it's, for the benefit of those of us here on this earth today and those generations to come. It's really nice to see so many wineries getting into sustainability and organic farming to help preserve the land and leave it a better place for the future generations.
Absolutely. I second that. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ellen. We've really appreciated having you as a guest.
It's my pleasure. I enjoyed meeting you, Anne, and seeing you again, Randall. And our paths will hopefully cross again sometime ahead.
Yes, very much appreciate Ellen. And I can't thank you enough.
With that,
Cheers,
cheers.
everyone. It's your palate. Whatever you like, you should drink. Nobody can tell you you're doing it wrong.
I love that. That's going to be our tagline.
There you go.
Thanks for listening. Check out Unwrapping Wine Podcast on Facebook and Instagram for information about the show, upcoming episodes, and to provide feedback. Episodes will be coming out every other week.